Have you ever looked at someone and thought you knew their entire history? I bet you have. People do this to me all the time. They see a 41-year-old healthcare professional working shifts at an emergency room in Seattle, Washington, and assume they know exactly who I am. But that day, when Dr. Marcus Whitmore pointed to the marks on my forearm and mocked them in front of the entire surgical team, saying they looked like prison scribbles, he had no idea he was ridiculing symbols that represent 9 years of my service in elite military units. Every line of that tattoo tells the story of comrades I held as they lost their lives in territories that officially never existed. What Dr. Whitmore also didn't know was that his words would set off a chain of events that would reveal one of the biggest medical malpractice scandals the hospital had ever seen. My name is Diana Crawford, and this is the story of how my Special Forces training prepared me for the most crucial confrontation of my life. A battle fought not in a conflict zone, but in the corridors of an American hospital. A battle that nearly cost me everything, but one that had to be faced, because in the end, whether on the battlefield or in the operating room, my mission has always been the same: to preserve lives, regardless of the personal cost. My name is Diana Crawford. I'm 41 years old, and I work as a nurse at the Seattle Emergency Center, one of the busiest hospitals on the West Coast. To anyone who sees me in the hallways, I'm just another healthcare professional doing her job. I wear dark green scrubs, tie my blonde hair in a functional bun, and maintain a neutral expression even during the most chaotic emergencies. But there are aspects of me that people don't notice at first glance. The way I assess every room I enter, identifying exits and potential threats in seconds. The way my hands never shake, even when dealing with the most extreme situations. The almost supernatural calm I maintain when other professionals panic. My colleagues attribute this to experience, assuming I simply work well under pressure. They don't know that this serenity was forged in me during years of military service that I can't openly discuss. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a family where serving the nation was more than a duty. It was a legacy passed down through generations. My father was a Marine major, my grandmother served as a military nurse in the Korean War, and my older sister was in the Special Forces before I even finished high school. While other girls in my school dreamed of prestigious universities and corporate careers, I spent weekends learning advanced first aid and survival skills from my father. By 16, I knew my path would be different. I didn't want a conventional life. I wanted to make a difference in a way that truly mattered, even if it meant sacrificing the normalcy others my age took for granted. The day I turned 18, I went straight to the military recruiting center. My mother wept. She had witnessed what military service had done to my father and sister: the prolonged absences, the heavy silences when they returned from missions they couldn't talk about, the nighttime nightmares they tried to hide. But she also knew that trying to stop me would be futile. I had inherited the Crawford family's stubbornness, this need to be where the action was, where I could truly save lives. The recruiter was impressed by my basic medical knowledge and my above-average physical fitness. He talked about opportunities, about how I could serve my country while developing valuable medical skills. What he didn't mention were the years of trauma, isolation, and secrets that lay ahead. Basic training was intense, but I expected it. What I didn't expect was to be identified as a candidate for a special operations medical unit during the first 6 weeks. At that time, very few women were accepted into this type of program. The tests were designed to break you physically and mentally. 30-kilometer runs in full gear in scorching heat. Combat simulations where you had to treat wounded while live ammunition flew overhead. Psychological torture scenarios where officers screamed that you weren't strong enough, that you should give up and go home like the other weak girls who tried before. But I didn't give up. Every insult, every impossible test only fueled my determination. At 20, I was deployed on my first real mission. I can't say where. The country remains classified to this day. What I can say is that it was there that I learned the true meaning of making life or death decisions. I was stationed at a remote outpost with a team of 15 operators. We were attacked in the early morning hours. 4 men were seriously injured. I had minutes to stabilize them in conditions that defied any medical protocol I had learned. Without adequate electricity, with limited supplies, and under constant enemy fire, I had to perform procedures that would normally require a full operating room. 3 of them survived. 1 did not. It was the first time I had held someone as they died, feeling the life drain from them despite everything I tried to do. His name was Thomas. He was 22, and he carried a photo of his mother in his pocket. That experience transformed something fundamental in me. Over the next 8 years, I participated in countless operations. I learned to operate in absolute silence, to read body language to detect lies, to maintain composure when others crumbled. The tattoo on my forearm began as a small mark after my first mission. With each comrade I saved or lost, I added another symbol. It's a coded map of my military history, understandable only to those who were there. 14 symbols in total, 14 moments that defined who I became. But the emotional toll was devastating. I hadn't slept properly in years. Every loud noise put me on high alert. Relationships were impossible when you couldn't talk about where you were or what you were doing. At 28, I realized that if I continued on this path, there would be nothing human left in me. What do you think so far? Is this story resonating with you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Leaving the Special Forces was one of the hardest decisions of my life. For 9 years, my identity had been completely tied to my military service. I was the Special Operations medic, the woman who kept men alive in impossible situations, the soldier who never backed down. But post-traumatic stress was destroying me from the inside. The nightmares were constant. I woke in a panic, my heart racing, searching for threats that didn't exist. Loud noises made me automatically take cover. Crowds made me anxious because I couldn't monitor all potential threats simultaneously. My commander noticed. During my final review, she was blunt. I had given everything to the service, but now I needed to take care of myself. She signed my honorable discharge without hesitation, but her eyes held sadness. She knew what awaited me outside. The transition to civilian life was brutal. I moved to Seattle, Washington, partly because I had a distant cousin there, partly because I wanted to be away from anything that reminded me of Portland and my military life. I enrolled in an accelerated nursing program, thinking I could use my military medical skills in a hospital setting. But nursing school was a culture shock. My classmates were mostly young women in their 20s who complained about exams and relationship dramas. I was 29 and had witnessed things they couldn't imagine in their worst nightmares. I tried to connect, to be normal, but every conversation felt superficial and meaningless. How could I care about grades when I had memories of holding intestines inside someone, while enemy helicopters hunted us? It was during this period that I met Ryan. He was a paramedic, also a veteran, albeit from a different unit. We met at a support group for veterans with PTSD that I reluctantly began attending. Ryan was one of the few who didn't need explanations. When I woke up screaming in the middle of the night, he simply held me without asking questions. When I had panic attacks in public places, he created a discreet escape without making me feel weak. Our relationship developed quickly, built on shared trauma and mutual understanding. But there was also a toxicity to it. Two broken veterans trying to mend themselves through each other rarely worked. Our fights were intense. We both had control issues. We both struggled with depression. We both used alcohol to numb the memories. But at that time, he was all I had that approached stability. Thank you for sticking with me this far. This story is deeply personal, and I'm grateful to share it with you. And believe me, the best is yet to come. I graduated from the nursing program at the top of my class. My technical skills were unquestionable, developed through years of dealing with trauma in extreme conditions. During my internships, supervisors frequently commented on my exceptional calm during emergencies. What they didn't know was that for me, a hospital emergency room was a controlled environment compared to the combat zones where I had worked. It had reliable electricity, adequate equipment, and no one was shooting at you. It was almost peaceful. I landed a position at the Seattle Emergency Center immediately after graduation. The hospital had a reputation for being one of the most intense on the West Coast, handling the most serious cases of traffic accidents, gun violence, and other critical emergencies. It was exactly the kind of high-pressure environment where my military skills could come in handy. My supervisor, Rebecca, was a veteran nurse with 35 years of experience. During my first week, she took me aside and said, "You have something different, a calmness under pressure that they don't teach in nursing school." She was right, but I couldn't explain where it came from. I quickly distinguished myself in the department. When multiple trauma victims arrived simultaneously, I could triage and prioritize them with an efficiency that impressed even the most experienced doctors. My hands never trembled as I inserted IV line into collapsed veins. I could anticipate complications before the obvious signs appeared, a skill honed by years of reading combat situations. But this competence came at a price. My approach was direct, sometimes brusque. I had no patience for medical egos or unnecessary bureaucratic procedures. When I saw something wrong, I spoke openly, without sugarcoating the message. This earned me respect among some nurses and technicians, but it also created enemies, especially among doctors who didn't like being questioned by a nurse. Dr. Marcus Whitmore was the worst of them. A 55-year-old cardiovascular surgeon, he had built a brilliant reputation based on some groundbreaking procedures he had performed a decade earlier. But in recent years, years, his arrogance had grown proportionally to his declining skills. He treated nurses like servants, yelled at residents, and rarely admitted mistakes. From our first shift together, it was clear we were in for trouble. During an emergency surgery, he ordered a procedure I knew was wrong based on the patient's vital signs. I politely questioned him. He exploded, yelling that nurses had no authority to question surgeons. I backed away at that moment, but documented everything. My military training taught me, when you identify an enemy, you gather intelligence and bide your time. The tension between Dr. Whitmore and me had been building for months. Every shift we worked together was a silent battle of wills. He would make condescending comments about my technique, question my decisions in front of other staff, and generally try to make me look incompetent. But I remained calm, responded professionally, and continued to do my job impeccably. Other nurses warned me not to provoke him. Dr. Whitmore had powerful connections in the hospital administration. Nurses who had challenged him before had seen their careers stall or been reassigned to undesirable shifts, but I wasn't like the other nurses. I'd faced tyrannical commanders in war zones. An arrogant surgeon didn't intimidate me. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in May. We were preparing for a complex emergency heart surgery. The patient was a 65-year-old man who had suffered a massive heart attack. The surgical team was preparing the equipment when Dr. Whitmore arrived, 25 minutes late, clearly in a hurry. During the prep, he noticed my tattoo. I usually kept it covered, but as I scrubbed my hands for surgery, the sleeve of my scrubs had ridden up, exposing the complex symbols on my left forearm. He stopped, stared, and then let out a loud laugh. "Such strange markings," he said, his voice echoing through the prep room. "They look like prison scribbles. Were you incarcerated before becoming a nurse, Crawford?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Some of the younger technicians and nurses laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or an insult. I felt my face heat, anger creeping up my spine. That tattoo represented Thomas, who died at 22 in my arms. It represented Anna, who lost an arm but survived because I managed to stop the bleeding in time. It represented Derek, Lucas, Melissa, and 9 others whose lives intertwined with mine in moments of extreme violence and humanity. Each symbol was a sacred memory, a tribute to sacrifices that Dr. Whitmore, with all his arrogance and privilege, could never comprehend. But I said nothing. I just stared at him, my face returning to the neutral mask I'd perfected over years of military interrogations. "No, sir," I replied calmly. "Just something personal. Can we focus on the surgery?" He shrugged, clearly expecting a more emotional reaction, and continued on to the operating room. But something had snapped inside me. It wasn't just the insult. It was the reminder that in civilian settings, my service, my sacrifice, my history were invisible. I was just a nurse with strange scars. In that moment, I made a decision. If Dr. Whitmore wanted war, he would get one, but it would be fought on my terms, with my rules. In the weeks following the tattoo incident, I began observing Dr. Whitmore with the same intensity I had used to monitor enemy targets during military operations. My intelligence training wasn't just about combat medicine. It included observation, documentation, and pattern identification. I began to notice things that other professionals ignored or chose not to see. Dr. Whitmore often arrived for surgeries looking tired, sometimes with a slight tremor in his hands. His surgical times were increasing, with procedures that should have taken 2 hours stretching to 4. He made small mistakes, nothing catastrophic, but enough to add unnecessary risk to his patients. During a particularly complex coronary bypass surgery, I witnessed something that changed everything. Dr. Whitmore was closing a critical suture when his hand slipped slightly. It wasn't dramatic, just a millimeter of deviation, but enough to potentially compromise the integrity of the suture. I saw it. The senior surgical nurse saw it. The anesthesiologist probably saw it, but no one said anything. Dr. Whitmore continued, completed the procedure, and left the room as if nothing had happened. The patient survived, but in the following days, developed unusual complications that required a second surgery. When I discreetly reviewed the surgical records, Dr. Whitmore had documented the procedure as flawless, with no mention of the error. I faced a moral dilemma I recognized all too well. During military deployments, I had faced similar situations, moments where exposing the truth could save lives, but also destroy careers and put you in danger. The difference was that in the Special Forces, there were clear chain of command protocols and whistleblower protections. In a civilian hospital, especially for a nurse challenging an established surgeon, the rules were different. Dr. Whitmore had power, connections, and decades of reputation. I was a relatively new nurse with a military background that some considered shaky. If I reported him, I would need irrefutable evidence, and even then, I could lose everything. But there was another consideration, more important than my career. Patients were at risk. That man who needed a second surgery could have avoided weeks of additional suffering if the initial error had been corrected immediately. How many other patients had suffered unnecessary complications due to Dr. Whitmore's unacknowledged mistakes? During my military service, I swore an oath to protect lives. That oath didn't expire when I traded my military uniform for scrubs. I made my decision. I would begin meticulously documenting everything, building a case that could not be ignored or dismissed. I would use every skill Special Forces taught me, not for war, but for justice. Over the next 2 months, I transformed myself into an intelligence agent, operating within the hospital itself. I began keeping a detailed record of every surgery I participated in with Dr. Whitmore. I documented procedure times, questionable surgical decisions, patient outcomes, and post-operative complications. I did this discreetly, using personal codes I had developed during military operations, keeping everything in a notebook I carried with me at all times. I also began casually chatting with other nurses and technicians, asking questions that seemed innocent, but revealed important information. I discovered I wasn't the only one who had noticed Dr. Whitmore's decline. Several staff members had concerns, but all were afraid to speak up. A veteran nurse named Sandra confided in me about an incident 4 years earlier when another nurse tried to expose Dr. Whitmore's mistakes. The nurse was systematically discredited, eventually left the hospital, and never again found work at a major medical institution. The message was clear. Challenging Dr. Whitmore had devastating consequences, but this information only strengthened my resolve. Systems that protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable were exactly the kind of corruption I fought against during military deployments. The setting had changed, but the fundamental mission remained the same. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday in July. Dr. Whitmore was performing heart valve surgery on a 56-year-old woman named Margaret. It was a routine procedure, something he had done hundreds of times. But from the beginning, I noticed worrying signs. His hands were shaking more than usual. He was irritable, lashing out at the team. The surgery was supposed to take about 3 hours, but it stretched to 5. During the closure, he made a critical error in the placement of a crucial suture. I saw it clearly. I politely asked if he wanted to review that area. He exploded, yelling that I should do my job and let him do his. The team flinched. He completed the procedure and quickly left. Margaret survived the surgery, but 3 days later, she developed severe complications that required emergency intervention. Her recovery was long and painful. When I reviewed her records, it became clear that the complications were a direct result of the error I had witnessed. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I reviewed all the documents I had collected. I had evidence of at least 9 cases where Dr. Whitmore's errors had led to unnecessary complications. I had testimonies from 6 other professionals willing to corroborate her concerns if adequate safeguards were in place. I had a clear pattern of decline and a system that chose reputation over patient safety. It was time to act. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear from where in the world you're following this story. Handing my evidence over to the hospital's medical review board was one of the scariest things I've ever done, including missions where I was directly targeted. At least in combat, you know your enemies, and the rules of engagement are clear. In a hospital hierarchy, alliances are opaque, and retaliation can come from any direction. I prepared a comprehensive, chronologically organized dossier with detailed medical analyses of each case, corroborating testimony, and a timeline showing Dr. Whitmore's pattern of decline. I applied the same meticulousness I would to a military intelligence report. There was no room for emotion or vague accusations, only documented facts and objective analysis. The board's initial response was cautious. They took my report seriously enough to launch a discreet investigation, but made it clear that I was to maintain absolute silence on the matter. I was instructed to continue working as usual while the investigation continued. But hospitals are like small towns. Secrets are impossible to keep. Within 2 weeks, Dr. Whitmore discovered there was an investigation, and that I was the source of the accusations. The retaliation was immediate and brutal. He began a systematic campaign to destroy my professional and personal credibility. First, he began documenting every small error or deviation from protocol I made, no matter how trivial. A medication administered 7 minutes outside the optimal window, documented. A note in a medical record missing a minor detail, documented. He shared this documentation with administrators, building a file that suggested incompetence. Then, he began spreading rumors about my mental health. He told other doctors and administrators that I had severe post-traumatic stress disorder due to my unstable military record, that my accusations were revenge for his justifiable reprimands of me in the past. He painted a picture of a troubled veteran who couldn't adapt to the civilian environment and projected her own failings onto competent professionals. The strategy worked terribly well. Other doctors began treating me differently, with a mixture of pity and distrust. Some administrators suggested I might need time away, that my complaint might be the result of professional stress and unresolved trauma. I felt the hospital's power structure closing in around me, protecting one of their own from an outside whistleblower. 3 weeks after submitting my report, I was placed on involuntary administrative leave while the investigation continued. code. They said it was standard procedure, but the underlying message was clear: stay quiet and disappear, or your career is over. The administrative leave was supposed to last 2 weeks, but it extended to 7. During that time, my life fell apart in ways I couldn't have anticipated. My relationship with Ryan, already fragile due to our individual struggles, completely collapsed under the added pressure. He accused me of being unable to leave the military, mentality behind, of always needing to be at war, of simply being unable to do my job without creating conflict. He was tired, he said, of trying to hold together the pieces of someone who seemed determined to break again and again. We ended up in a horrible fight, where we both said things we couldn't take back. He left with his things, and I was left alone in an apartment that suddenly seemed too big. Financially, the situation was becoming desperate. Administrative leave was technically paid, but at a paltry level that barely covered rent and basic expenses. My bank account was dwindling as medical bills for therapy and anxiety medication piled up. I began to consider dire possibilities. What if I lost the investigation? What if my nursing license was revoked? How would I survive? What career path could I pursue? My military training was too specialized to easily transfer to regular civilian jobs. For the first time since leaving the Special Forces, I seriously considered quitting. Maybe Ryan was right. Maybe I was incapable of functioning in normal environments. Maybe I should just let Dr. Whitmore win and quietly fade away. It was during this darkest period that I received an unexpected call. It was Sandra, the veteran nurse who had told me about the previous whistleblower. She said she had heard about my administrative leave and wanted to meet with me. We met at a discreet cafe away from the hospital. Sandra seemed nervous, constantly looking around as if afraid of being seen. Then she told me something that changed everything. Other professionals were ready to speak out. 6 nurses, 3 surgical technicians, and surprisingly, 2 of the senior anesthesiologists had decided to present their own testimonies corroborating my accusations against Dr. Whitmore. They had remained silent for years out of fear, but my courage in confronting him had inspired them to do the same. The hospital investigation took a dramatic turn with this new wave of testimony. The medical review board could no longer dismiss the allegations as the complaint of a single problematic nurse. There was an indisputable pattern supported by multiple respected professionals. Outside auditors were brought in to review Dr. Whitmore's surgical cases from the past 6 years. What they discovered was devastating. There was clear evidence of a decline in his technical skills, an increase in post-operative complications in his patients compared to other surgeons, and multiple instances where errors had been covered up or inadequately documented. The pattern was undeniable. 11 weeks after my initial complaint, Dr. Marcus Whitmore was formally suspended. 3 weeks later, his medical license was permanently revoked by the State Board of Medicine. News of the revocation spread through the hospital like wildfire. For some, it was a victory for justice, proof that the system could work when courageous professionals spoke out. For others, it was a scandal, the destruction of a respected surgeon's career by accusations they still considered exaggerated. I became a deeply polarizing figure. Some nurses saw me as a hero, someone who had finally done what many wanted but lacked the courage to do. Others saw me as a traitor, someone who had broken the unwritten code of professional loyalty and caused a public scandal that tarnished the entire hospital's reputation. Administrators treated me warily, never knowing whether I was a valuable asset or a dangerous liability. But the most significant change was systematic. The hospital implemented new oversight protocols for senior surgeons. It established a confidential hotline to report patient safety concerns. It created stronger protections for internal whistleblowers. It initiated mandatory training on safety culture and team communication. None of this would return the unnecessary suffering Dr. Whitmore's patients experienced, but it could prevent future patients from going through the same. It was Margaret, the patient who suffered complications from heart valve surgery, who sent me a letter I still have. She wrote thanking me for having the courage to speak out when others remained silent. She said her long and painful recovery would be meaningful if it resulted in changes that protected others. That letter made me cry for the first time since this whole situation began. It validated that everything I had been through, all the pain and loss, had been worth it. Today, 6 years after the Dr. Whitmore scandal, I still work at the Seattle Emergency Center, but my role has expanded significantly. In addition to my regular clinical responsibilities, I now train new professionals on medical ethics, patient advocacy, and how to navigate situations where they witness something wrong. I speak openly about my military background and how the skills I developed there, keen observation, courage under pressure, and unwavering commitment to the mission, are exactly what the healthcare system needs. I no longer hide my tattoo. I use it as a starting point for conversations about service service, sacrifice, and the kind of strength that comes from facing impossible odds. My personal life has also found some stability. Ryan and I never reconciled, but we eventually managed to have a civil conversation where we both acknowledged that we were at different points in our healing journeys. He found peace through intensive therapy and a healthy new relationship. I've found peace by accepting that some parts of me will always carry the weight of what I experienced, both in the special forces and in the hospital, and that this doesn't make me broken, it makes me experienced. I date occasionally, but I've learned not to look for someone to fix me. I'm learning to fix myself, or rather, to accept that maybe I don't need to be fixed, just understood. My relationships with colleagues gradually improved. Those who initially saw me as problematic began to recognize that standing up for principles, even when difficult, strengthens the entire profession. I'm frequently approached by younger nurses facing ethical dilemmas who witness something questionable but are afraid to speak out. I share my experiences honestly, including the personal cost of speaking out, but I always emphasize that some battles must be fought, some principles are non-negotiable. Patient safety is at the top of that list. If you see something that puts lives at risk, you have a moral obligation to act, regardless of the personal consequences. Reflecting on this entire journey, I realize my path has always been about protection. In special forces, I protected soldiers in combat zones. As a nurse, I protect patients in an imperfect healthcare system. The scenarios have changed, but the fundamental mission has remained constant. I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite fear. I've learned that systems only change when individuals refuse to accept the status quo. I've learned that sometimes you lose relationships, financial security, and peace of mind by standing up for what's right, but you gain something more valuable, the ability to look in the mirror and respect the person you see. My tattoo remains on my forearm, now accompanied by a new symbol I added last year. This one doesn't represent a military operation, but the battle I fought inside the hospital. It represents Margaret and all the other patients who were protected by the changes I helped implement. It represents the nurses who found the courage to speak out after seeing that it was possible to challenge the system and survive. It represents the version of myself that refused to remain silent when I witnessed injustice. When I look at this tattoo now, I don't see strange markings like Dr. Whitmore did. I see a map of my life, the battles I chose to fight, the people I chose to protect, the kind of professional and human being I strive to become. And for the first time in a long time, I am at peace with this person. This was the story of Diana Crawford, a former special operations leader who turned her military training into a tool for systemic change within a hospital. A story of courage, sacrifice, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the personal cost is devastating. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed situations in professional settings where someone had to show moral courage to speak the truth? How do you think Diana's military background helped or hindered her nursing career? Would you have made the same decisions she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your thoughts and perspectives on these true stories. If this story resonated with you in any way, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of the incredible stories we have in store. Each story we share here is about real healthcare professionals who faced extraordinary situations, and each contains profound lessons about courage, ethics, and the true meaning of caring for others. And don't leave yet. Click on the next recommended video to learn the shocking story of another nurse whose secret life was uncovered in a completely unexpected way, changing her career forever. You won't want to miss this. Thanks for watching, and until next time.